In a world where viral videos often showcase the worst of human behavior, something extraordinary happened outside Buckingham Palace on a crisp London morning. What started as a routine day for the King's Guard became an unforgettable lesson in respect, tradition, and the power of genuine human connection. When a group of Japanese tourists encountered the stoic sentinel in his iconic red uniform and towering bearskin hat, their response would not only touch millions of hearts, but also remind us all of what true courtesy looks like in our modern age. This is the remarkable true story of how a simple gesture of respect transcended cultural boundaries, sparked a global conversation about honor and tradition, and proved that sometimes the most powerful moments come not from grand speeches or dramatic events, but from the quiet dignity of everyday human interactions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Guardsman James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic for what felt like the 100th time that day. At 24 years old, James had been serving with the Queen's Guard for 3 years, but the weight of tradition never failed to humble him. The iconic red uniform, the towering bearskin hat that added nearly 18 inches to his already impressive 6-foot frame, and the responsibility of protecting one of the world's most famous residences. It all felt as significant today as it had on his very first day. The tourist season was in full swing, and James knew what to expect. Hundreds of visitors would pass by his post throughout the day, many trying to make him laugh, smile, or break his ceremonial stance. Some would pose for photographs, others would ask questions he couldn't answer, and a few would inevitably test the boundaries of respect. It was all part of the job, something every guard learned to handle with patience and professionalism. As the morning progressed, James maintained his position with the discipline that had been drilled into him during countless hours of training. His eyes remained fixed straight ahead, his expression stoic and unwavering. The familiar sounds of London surrounded him, the rumble of black cabs, the chatter of tour groups, the clicking of camera shutters. To most observers, he appeared almost statue-like, but James was acutely aware of everything happening around him. At precisely 11:30, a group of 12 Japanese tourists approached the palace gates. They moved with a quiet dignity that immediately set them apart from the typical crowd. Led by an elderly gentleman who appeared to be in his 70s, the group consisted of 3 families spanning 3 generations. The elderly man, Hiroshi Tanaka, walked with the aid of a wooden cane, his silver hair neatly combed and his posture remarkably straight despite his age. Hiroshi had saved for years to bring his family to London. This trip represented more than just a vacation. It was a dream fulfilled, a chance to share with his children and grandchildren the stories he had heard about England since his own youth. He had served briefly in Japan's self-defense forces in his younger days and held deep respect for military tradition and ceremony, regardless of nationality. The group approached James's position slowly, their voices hushed as they observed the impressive figure before them. Unlike many tourists who treated the guards as living statues or photo opportunities, this family seemed to understand they were in the presence of something sacred. The children, ranging in age from 8 to 16, stayed close to their parents, their eyes wide with genuine awe rather than mischief. Sarah Chen, a British-Japanese woman who worked as their tour guide, had been explaining the significance of the King's Guard throughout their morning walk. She had detailed the history, the training, the dedication required to stand in such a position. Her explanations had clearly resonated with the family, as evidenced by their respectful approach and quiet demeanor. As they drew closer, James could see the genuine interest in their faces. The youngest child, a girl of perhaps 8 years old, named Yuki, tugged gently at her grandfather's sleeve and whispered something in Japanese. Hiroshi nodded and whispered back, his weathered face creasing into the hint of a smile. The family positioned themselves at a respectful distance, far enough away to avoid interfering with James's duties, but close enough to observe the ceremony and tradition he represented. They spoke in hushed tones, pointing occasionally but never in a way that seemed disrespectful or mocking. Their camera clicked softly as they documented the moment, but even their photography felt different, more like they were capturing a piece of history rather than collecting a tourist trophy. James remained motionless, but he couldn't help but notice the difference in this group's approach. In his 3 years of service, he had encountered thousands of tourists. Most meant no harm, but their interactions often felt transactional. They wanted a photo, a reaction, a story to tell back home. This family felt different. They observed him with what seemed like genuine respect and understanding of what he represented. The elderly gentleman, Hiroshi, stepped forward slightly. He removed his hat, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes about his character and upbringing. In Japanese culture, removing one's hat in the presence of authority or during formal occasions is a sign of deep respect. Without saying a word, Hiroshi was acknowledging not just James as an individual, but the institution, tradition, and responsibility he represented. The rest of the family followed Hiroshi's lead. The men removed their caps and hats, the women lowered their heads slightly in a gesture of respect, and the children stood quietly, their playful energy temporarily set aside in recognition of the solemnity of the moment. It wasn't a choreographed performance. It was a spontaneous display of cross-cultural respect that spoke to something deeper than tourism or curiosity. James felt something stir within him as he witnessed this display. His training had prepared him to remain unmoved by the actions of tourists, to maintain his ceremonial composure regardless of what happened around him. But this wasn't tourists trying to get a reaction or treating him like an attraction. This was a family showing genuine respect for what he represented, honoring the tradition and service that his uniform embodied. The moment stretched on in comfortable silence. Other tourists passing by began to notice the scene. The Japanese family standing in quiet respect before the guard, the palpable sense of dignity and honor that seemed to radiate from their simple gesture. Some slowed their pace, curious about what was happening. Others instinctively lowered their voices, sensing they were witnessing something special. A young woman with a smartphone had been recording videos of various guards throughout her morning tour of London. She had captured guards ignoring persistent attempts at conversation, maintaining their composure while tourists made faces or tried to provoke reactions. But when she turned her camera toward James and the Japanese family, she found herself recording something entirely different. The contrast was striking and immediate. Where other interactions had felt somewhat adversarial, tourists trying to break the guards' concentration, guards steadfastly maintaining their duty, this felt collaborative. The family's respect seemed to elevate the moment, transforming what could have been just another tourist photo opportunity into something that felt almost ceremonial. Hiroshi's grandson, a boy of about 14 named Kenji, watched his grandfather with obvious admiration. The teenager had grown up in modern Japan, where traditional formalities were often seen as outdated or unnecessary. But seeing his grandfather's natural dignity in this moment, understanding how respect could be communicated across cultural and language barriers without a single word being spoken, was clearly making an impression on the young man. The family's youngest member, little Yuki, seemed to understand the importance of the moment even at her tender age. She stood perfectly still, her small hands clasped in front of her, occasionally glancing up at her grandfather for guidance. Her quiet behavior spoke to the family values that had been instilled in her from an early age, values that emphasized respect for others, especially those in service to their community or country. As the minutes passed, other tourists began to gather at a respectful distance, drawn by the unusual scene. The typical noise and bustle of the tourist area seemed to quiet slightly, as if the family's respectful demeanor was creating a bubble of dignity around James's post. Some visitors began following the family's example, removing their hats or adopting more respectful postures. James could feel the shift in the atmosphere around him. What had started as a routine morning at his post was becoming something unique and meaningful. The Japanese family's simple gesture of respect was creating ripples that extended far beyond their immediate group, influencing the behavior of everyone around them, and transforming the entire dynamic of the tourist experience in that moment. The young woman recording with her smartphone found herself capturing not just the interaction between the guard and the Japanese family, but the broader effect their behavior was having on everyone present. Her video was inadvertently documenting how respect and dignity could be contagious, how one family's values could elevate an entire moment and inspire others to recognize the humanity and service represented by the ceremonial guard. As the scene continued to unfold, it became clear that something special was happening outside Buckingham Palace that morning, something that would soon capture the attention of people around the world and remind them of the power of simple human courtesy. The respectful silence continued for several more minutes as the Tanaka family maintained their dignified stance before Guardsman Mitchell. Other members of their tour group had initially been curious about the delay, but as they approached and witnessed the scene, they too felt compelled to join in the quiet reverence. What had begun with one family's gesture of respect was gradually expanding to include more people, creating an unexpected moment of international understanding. Hiroshi Tanaka's weathered hands gripped his walking cane as he continued to stand with his hat removed, his silver hair catching the morning light. His military background, though brief, had instilled in him a deep understanding of what it meant to serve one's country. Looking at the young British soldier before him, Hiroshi saw not just a tourist attraction or ceremonial figure, but a young man dedicated to duty and service. The red tunic, the bearskin hat, the unwavering stance, these were symbols of commitment that transcended national boundaries. The eldest son in the family, Akira, had initially been somewhat embarrassed by his father's formal behavior. At 45, Akira worked in international business and was accustomed to more casual interactions with people from different cultures. He had worried that his father's traditional ways might seem outdated or unnecessary to other tourists. But as he watched the effect of his father's simple gesture, he began to understand the profound impact that genuine respect could have. James Mitchell, still maintaining his ceremonial position, found himself deeply moved by the family's continued show of respect. In his training, he had been taught to expect various reactions from the public: curiosity, amusement, attempts at distraction, and occasionally disrespect. But he had never experienced anything quite like this sustained demonstration of honor and recognition. The family wasn't trying to get a reaction from him. They were simply acknowledging the significance of what he represented. The morning air carried the usual sounds of London traffic, conversations in multiple languages, the distant calls of street vendors. But in the immediate area around James's post, a bubble of unusual quiet had formed. Even tourists who didn't understand the specific cultural significance of the Japanese family's behavior could sense that something meaningful was happening. Sarah Chen, the tour guide, found herself in an unexpected position. She had led hundreds of tours through London, explaining the history and significance of various landmarks and traditions, but she had never witnessed such a spontaneous and moving display of cross-cultural respect. As someone who straddled both Japanese and British cultures, she understood the deeper meaning of what was unfolding before her. The Tanaka family's youngest generation was learning a lesson that no textbook could teach. Yuki, the 8-year-old, watched her grandfather with wide eyes, absorbing not just his actions, but the effect those actions were having on everyone around them. Her teenage cousin Kenji, who had been somewhat dismissive of what he saw as old-fashioned formalities earlier in the trip, was beginning to understand the power that respectful behavior could wield. A businessman hurrying past on his way to an important meeting found himself slowing as he approached the scene. Michael Davidson had lived in London for 30 years and passed by Buckingham Palace countless times, usually without giving the guards much thought. They were simply part of the city's landscape, as familiar and unchanging as the red buses or black cabs. But seeing the Japanese family's respectful stance made him pause and really look at the young soldier for the first time in years. The woman recording with her smartphone, Emma Thompson, had started her morning with plans to create a light-hearted video about London's tourist attractions. She had already filmed several interactions between tourists and guards, most of which followed predictable patterns. But this scene was different, and she found herself lowering her phone slightly, feeling that perhaps some moments were too meaningful to be reduced to social media content. As more tourists gathered around the respectful scene, an interesting dynamic began to develop. Instead of the usual noise and chaos that often surrounded the guard posts, people began to naturally adopt more subdued behavior. Conversations became quieter, movements more deliberate, and the general atmosphere shifted from casual tourism to something approaching reverence. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly British woman who had been visiting the palace regularly for over 20 years, approached the growing crowd with curiosity. She had seen countless interactions between tourists and guards, but this scene was unlike anything in her experience. As she watched the Japanese family's continued display of respect, she felt a surge of pride in what these visitors thought worthy of such honor. The ripple effects of the family's behavior continued to spread. A group of American teenagers, who had been laughing loudly and taking selfies just moments before, found themselves speaking in hushed tones as they approached. The natural dignity of the scene seemed to call for a more respectful response, and they instinctively adjusted their behavior accordingly. James could sense the changing atmosphere around his post, though his training required him to maintain his forward gaze and ceremonial stance. The usual background noise of tourist chatter, camera clicks, and casual conversations had been replaced by something more subdued and respectful. He could feel the weight of more eyes upon him, but it felt different from the usual scrutiny. More appreciative than curious, more understanding than demanding. Hiroshi's wife Emiko stood beside her husband with quiet pride. She had been married to him for over 50 years and had long admired his natural dignity and respect for others. Watching him honor this young British soldier in such a simple but meaningful way reminded her of all the reasons she had fallen in love with him decades earlier. His values hadn't changed or diminished with age. If anything, they had become more refined and impactful. The family's middle generation, Akira and his wife Miyuki, along with Hiroshi's daughter Sachiko and her husband, found themselves reflecting on the values they were passing down to their own children. In a world that often seemed to prioritize speed and efficiency over courtesy and respect, watching the older generation demonstrate these timeless principles was both humbling and inspiring. A photographer from a local newspaper who had been in the area covering a different story noticed the unusual gathering around the guard post. Professional instinct told him this might be newsworthy, but as he approached with his camera, he found himself hesitating. The dignity of the scene seemed to demand a different approach than typical tourist photography. The continuing silence was becoming almost ceremonial in nature. What had started as a simple gesture of respect was evolving into something that felt almost like an impromptu memorial or tribute. The Japanese family hadn't moved from their respectful positions, and their sustained demonstration of honor was clearly having a profound effect on everyone present. James began to understand that he was no longer just performing his regular duties as a ceremonial guard. He had become part of something larger, a moment of international understanding and respect that was touching everyone who witnessed it. The weight of the tradition he represented felt more significant than ever, not because of his own actions, but because of how others were choosing to honor it. Other guards at nearby posts had noticed the unusual quiet around James's position. While they remained focused on their own duties, they couldn't help but be aware that something special was happening. Word began to spread among the guard unit about the remarkable display of respect being shown by the Japanese visitors. The crowd that had gathered maintained a respectful distance, forming a loose semicircle around the family and the guard post. No one wanted to interfere with or diminish the significance of what was happening, but everyone seemed drawn to witness this remarkable display of cross-cultural respect and understanding. As the scene continued, it became clear that what had started as a simple tourist visit was becoming something much more meaningful, a demonstration of how respect, dignity, and understanding could bridge cultural differences and create moments of genuine human connection. The Japanese family's simple gesture was creating ripples that would soon extend far beyond the gates of Buckingham Palace. The remarkable scene at Buckingham Palace had now stretched beyond 15 minutes, an eternity in the usual rapid pace of tourist interactions. What made this moment even more extraordinary was that not a single word had been exchanged between the Japanese family and Guardsman Mitchell, yet the communication between them was profound and unmistakable. The language being spoken was one of mutual respect, honor, and recognition of service concepts that needed no translation. Hiroshi Tanaka's legs were beginning to feel the strain of standing for so long, but his resolve never wavered. The elderly gentleman had lived through decades of change in Japan, witnessing his country's transformation from post-war recovery to modern prosperity. Throughout all these changes, the values his parents had instilled in him, respect for service, honor for duty, recognition of sacrifice, had remained constant. Standing before this young British soldier, he was not just showing respect to an individual, but honoring the very concept of service that transcended national boundaries. The growing crowd of observers had begun to create its own dynamic. People were arriving with typical tourist energy and noise, but as they approached the scene, something in the atmosphere caused them to naturally moderate their behavior. Conversations became whispers, movements became more deliberate, and the usual casual photography gave way to more thoughtful observation. Dr. Patricia Williams, a cultural anthropologist from Cambridge University who had been in the area researching tourist behavior, found herself witnessing something remarkable from an academic perspective. She had studied cross-cultural interactions for over 20 years, but the scene unfolding before her represented something rarely captured in formal research, a spontaneous demonstration of how respect could be communicated across cultural boundaries without words, gestures, or formal protocols. The Japanese family's children were learning lessons that would stay with them for life. 12-year-old Hana, Akira's daughter, had initially been restless and eager to continue with their sightseeing schedule. But as the minutes passed and she watched her great-grandfather's unwavering stance, she began to understand that some things were more important than keeping to a timetable. The respect being shown wasn't about the specific person or even the specific tradition. It was about recognizing service, duty, and commitment wherever they were found. James Mitchell found his understanding of his role evolving as the silent interaction continued. His training had prepared him to be a symbol of British military tradition, to represent centuries of service and duty through his presence and bearing. But this family's response was showing him that his role had dimensions he had never fully appreciated. He wasn't just representing British tradition, he was representing the universal values of service and dedication that people of all cultures could recognize and honor. Emma Thompson, who had been recording the scene with her smartphone, made a decision that surprised even herself. She stopped recording and simply watched, feeling that some moments were too sacred to be mediated through a screen. Later, she would realize that this decision marked a turning point in her understanding of how technology should and shouldn't be used to capture human experiences. The silence around the guard post was becoming almost cathedral-like in its quality. The usual sounds of London continued in the background, but they seemed muted and distant. People spoke in hushed tones if they spoke at all, and even children seemed to sense the solemnity of the moment and naturally subdued their behavior. A group of French students who had been on a loud and boisterous tour of London found themselves deeply affected by the scene. Marie Dubois, their teacher, had been struggling all morning to manage their enthusiasm and energy. But as they encountered the Japanese family's respectful demonstration, the students naturally quieted and began asking thoughtful questions about what they were witnessing. The businessman, Michael Davidson, who had initially stopped just for a moment, found himself unable to leave. Something about the scene was forcing him to confront his own relationship with respect, tradition, and service. He began thinking about his own father, who had served in the Royal Navy, and wondered when he had last taken time to truly appreciate the significance of that service. Hiroshi's grandson Kenji was experiencing a profound shift in his understanding of his grandfather and the values he represented. As a teenager growing up in modern Tokyo, Kenji had often seen his grandfather's formal manners and traditional ways as outdated and unnecessary. But watching how his grandfather's simple act of respect was affecting dozens of strangers, creating an atmosphere of dignity and understanding, was opening his eyes to the power that genuine courtesy could wield. The ripple effects of the family's behavior were extending beyond the immediate crowd. Guards at other posts around the palace had heard about the unusual situation and were discussing it during their brief breaks. The story was beginning to spread through the regiment, creating conversations about the meaning and impact of their ceremonial duties. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly British woman who had been a regular visitor to the palace, found herself thinking about her own late husband, who had served in the Guards decades earlier. She remembered him describing the weight of the responsibility, the pride in the tradition, and the deep satisfaction that came from serving something larger than oneself. Watching this family honor those same values was bringing back powerful memories and emotions. The photographer from the local newspaper, David Roberts, had initially approached with professional detachment, seeing a potential human interest story. But as he observed the scene more carefully, he realized he was witnessing something that demanded a different kind of coverage. This wasn't just a quirky tourist interaction, it was a demonstration of how shared values could create understanding across cultural divides. Sarah Chen, the tour guide, found herself reflecting on her own bicultural identity. As someone who navigated between Japanese and British cultures daily, she often focused on the differences and challenges of cross-cultural communication. But this scene was showing her the profound similarities that could exist beneath surface cultural differences. The universal recognition of service, respect, and dignity. The sustained nature of the respectful stance was beginning to take on almost ceremonial significance. What had started as a spontaneous gesture was becoming something approaching a formal tribute. The Japanese family's commitment to maintaining their respectful position was demonstrating that true respect wasn't just a momentary politeness, but a sustained recognition of worth and service. James could feel his own appreciation for his role deepening as the interaction continued. Every day, hundreds of tourists passed by his post, and while most were respectful, few seemed to truly understand or appreciate the significance of what he represented. This family's sustained demonstration of respect was showing him that his service was indeed meaningful and valued, even by people from completely different cultures and backgrounds. The crowd of observers was beginning to include people who had heard about the scene and come specifically to witness it. Word was spreading through social media and personal messages, drawing people who wanted to see for themselves this remarkable display of cross-cultural respect. As the silent communication between the family and the guard continued, it became clear that something historically significant was unfolding. This wasn't just a touching moment between tourists and a local attraction. It was a demonstration of how respect, dignity, and understanding could create bridges between different peoples and cultures. The power of their silent communication was proving that some of the most important human interactions required no words at all, just mutual recognition of shared values and common humanity. The Japanese family's gesture was creating a moment of unity and understanding that would soon capture the attention of people around the world, reminding everyone of the profound impact that simple acts of respect could have in bringing people together across cultural and national boundaries. As the remarkable scene at Buckingham Palace approached its 20th minute, something unprecedented began to happen. Emma Thompson, despite her earlier decision to stop filming, realized she was witnessing something that the world needed to see. With trembling hands, she raised her smartphone once more and began recording the final moments of this extraordinary display of respect. Her footage would capture not just the Japanese family's continued reverence, but the profound effect their behavior was having on everyone around them. The moment she posted the video to social media with the caption, "This is what respect looks like," Japanese tourists showing incredible honor to King's Guard at Buckingham Palace, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Within the first hour, the video had been shared hundreds of times. Within 6 hours, it had reached thousands. By the end of the day, millions of people around the world had witnessed the Tanaka family's simple but profound gesture of respect. Dr. Patricia Williams, the Cambridge anthropologist, recognized the historical significance of what she was witnessing. She began taking detailed notes, documenting not just the family's behavior but the reactions of the crowd, the gradual shift in atmosphere, and the way respect seemed to be contagious among the observers. Her academic mind was already analyzing the implications of what she was seeing, a perfect example of how cultural values could transcend national boundaries and create moments of genuine human connection. The video's viral spread was unlike typical social media phenomena. Instead of the usual cycle of brief entertainment followed by quick forgetting, this footage was generating deep discussions about respect, tradition, and cross-cultural understanding. Comments poured in from around the world, with people sharing their own stories of military service, cultural exchange, and moments when they had been moved by simple acts of human dignity. James Mitchell, still maintaining his ceremonial position, was unaware of the digital storm building around him, but he could sense that the crowd around his post was growing larger and more diverse. People were arriving who seemed to know something special was happening, coming specifically to witness the scene rather than stumbling upon it during casual sightseeing. The British military community was among the first to embrace the viral video. Veterans, active service members, and their families shared the footage with pride and gratitude, expressing deep appreciation for the recognition being shown to their traditions and service. Many commented that they had never seen such a sustained and meaningful display of respect from foreign visitors. In Japan, the video's impact was equally profound but carried additional layers of meaning. Many Japanese viewers saw in Hiroshi Tanaka's behavior a reflection of traditional values that some worried were being lost in modern society. His simple act of removing his hat and maintaining a respectful stance was being discussed as an example of the best of Japanese cultural values: respect for service, recognition of duty, and the importance of honoring those who serve their communities. The Tanaka family, still unaware of the digital attention they were generating, finally began to conclude their respectful tribute. Hiroshi, his legs aching from the prolonged standing, slowly placed his hat back on his head. But before stepping away, he did something that would become the most remembered moment of the entire interaction. He bowed deeply to Guardsman Mitchell, not a casual nod or brief acknowledgement, but a formal, sustained bow that represented the highest form of respect in Japanese culture. The effect of this bow on the assembled crowd was electric. Many people had been moved by the family's sustained, respectful stance. But this formal conclusion to their tribute brought tears to several eyes. The depth of the bow, the sincerity of the gesture, and the grace with which it was performed seemed to encapsulate everything beautiful about human respect and dignity. James felt the bow as profoundly as if words had been spoken. His training had prepared him to remain unmoved by tourist interactions. But this wasn't a typical tourist interaction. This was one human being formally acknowledging another's service, sacrifice, and dedication. For a brief moment, James's eyes shifted slightly, not enough to break his ceremonial duty, but enough to acknowledge the remarkable gesture he had received. The family's bow was followed by those of the entire group. Children who had been learning about respect through their elders' example now had the chance to demonstrate their own understanding. Even little Yuki, the 8-year-old, bowed with the same formality and sincerity as her great-grandfather, showing that the values being demonstrated were truly intergenerational. As the family finally stepped back from their respectful tribute, the crowd that had gathered began to applaud. It started quietly, almost hesitantly, but grew into sustained appreciation for what everyone had witnessed. The applause wasn't for entertainment or performance. It was recognition of something genuine and meaningful that had touched everyone present. The viral video was now being picked up by major news outlets around the world. BBC, CNN, NHK in Japan, and dozens of other international media organizations were covering the story of the Japanese family's remarkable tribute to the British Guard. What had started as a simple tourist visit was becoming a global story about respect, tradition, and cross-cultural understanding. Social media was flooded with similar stories as the video inspired people to share their own experiences of cross-cultural respect and understanding. Military families shared stories of foreign visitors honoring their service members. Teachers discussed using the video to talk about respect and cultural values with their students. Community leaders saw it as an example of how simple gestures could bridge differences and build understanding. The immediate crowd at Buckingham Palace was beginning to disperse as the family's formal tribute concluded. But the impact of what had happened was just beginning. Many people lingered, discussing what they had witnessed and clearly moved by the experience. Conversations were starting between strangers who had shared this remarkable moment. David Roberts, the newspaper photographer, had captured several images of the scene, but he found himself struggling with how to present them. His editor wanted a human interest story, but Roberts felt that what he had witnessed deserved more serious treatment. This wasn't just a quirky tourist story, it was documentation of how respect and dignity could create moments of genuine international understanding. The Japanese embassy in London began receiving calls about the viral video. Cultural attachés who had spent years working to promote understanding between Britain and Japan suddenly found themselves with a perfect example of their country's shared values of service, respect, and honor. The video was being seen as a beautiful representation of the best aspects of both cultures. Military historians were beginning to analyze the video from their own perspectives. The ceremonial traditions of the King's Guard, the formal elements of Japanese respect and bowing, the way different cultural expressions of honor had found common ground, all of these elements were creating rich discussions about tradition, service, and international understanding. As news of the viral video spread, people began traveling to Buckingham Palace specifically hoping to recreate or witness similar moments of respect. The guards found themselves receiving more formal acknowledgments of their service, with visitors from many countries adopting more respectful approaches to their interactions with the ceremonial soldiers. The Tanaka family, still largely unaware of the global attention their simple gesture had generated, continued with their London tour. But their respectful tribute to Guardsman Mitchell had already accomplished something remarkable. It had reminded millions of people around the world about the power of simple human courtesy and the way respect could transcend any cultural or national boundary. The viral spread of their story was proving that in an age often characterized by division and misunderstanding, people everywhere were hungry for examples of genuine respect, dignity, and cross-cultural appreciation. The Japanese family's 20-minute tribute to a British soldier had become a global reminder of humanity's capacity for recognition, honor, and mutual respect. 3 months after that remarkable morning at Buckingham Palace, the impact of the Tanaka family's gesture continued to reverberate around the world. What had begun as a simple act of respect had evolved into something far more significant, a catalyst for conversations about dignity, service, and the power of cross-cultural understanding that touched millions of lives. Guardsman James Mitchell found his life forever changed by those 20 minutes of silent communication. The profound respect shown by the Japanese family had given him a deeper understanding of the significance of his role and the traditions he represented. He began speaking at schools and community groups about military service, using the viral video as an example of how respect and honor could transcend cultural boundaries. His presentations always emphasized that the family's gesture had taught him as much about dignity and service as years of formal training. The British Army incorporated the story into their cultural sensitivity training programs. New recruits learned about the incident as an example of how their service was viewed and valued by people from different cultures around the world. The story became a powerful tool for helping young soldiers understand that their ceremonial duties carried meaning far beyond the immediate requirements of their posts. In Japan, Hiroshi Tanaka became an unexpected cultural icon. At 73 years old, he found himself invited to speak at schools, community centers, and cultural events about the importance of maintaining traditional values of respect and honor. He was deeply humble about the attention, always emphasizing that he had simply done what his parents had taught him was right, to show respect for those who serve their communities and countries. The viral video had been viewed over 50 million times across various platforms, making it one of the most widely shared examples of positive cross-cultural interaction in social media history. But more importantly, it had inspired countless similar gestures around the world. Veterans organizations reported increased recognition and respect from community members. Military ceremonies found larger, more engaged audiences. Museums and memorial sites noted visitors adopting more respectful behavior and deeper engagement with exhibits about service and sacrifice. Educational systems around the world began using the video as a teaching tool. In Japan, it was incorporated into moral education curricula as an example of how traditional values remained relevant in modern society. In Britain, it became part of citizenship education programs, helping students understand the significance of military service and ceremonial traditions. International schools used it to discuss cross-cultural respect and understanding. Dr. Patricia Williams published her academic analysis of the incident in the Journal of Cross-Cultural Communication. Her paper, titled Silent Diplomacy, The Tanaka Incident and the Universal Language of Respect, became one of the most cited works in her field. She argued that the 20-minute interaction had demonstrated how fundamental human values could create bridges between different cultures more effectively than formal diplomatic efforts. The story's impact extended into unexpected areas. Corporate training programs began using the video to discuss customer service, workplace respect, and international business etiquette. Mental health professionals referenced it in discussions about the importance of recognition and appreciation in human relationships. Community leaders cited it as an example of how individual actions could create positive change in society. Sarah Chen, the tour guide, who had witnessed the entire interaction, found her career taking an unexpected direction. She became a sought-after speaker on cultural sensitivity and cross-cultural communication, always emphasizing the lessons she had learned from watching the Tanaka family's respectful behavior. Her presentations focused on how understanding and appreciation could be communicated through actions rather than words. The Tanaka family's children and grandchildren found themselves profoundly affected by their experience and the global reaction it generated. Kenji, the teenage grandson who had initially been somewhat dismissive of his grandfather's traditional ways, began studying Japanese cultural history and traditional values with new appreciation. He wrote his university entrance essay about the importance of maintaining respect and dignity in modern society, crediting his grandfather's example at Buckingham Palace as his inspiration. Little Yuki, the 8-year-old who had stood so quietly during the respectful tribute, began displaying remarkable maturity and consideration in her interactions with others. Her teachers noticed how naturally she showed respect for authority figures, service workers, and elderly community members. Her parents realized that witnessing her great-grandfather's demonstration of respect had provided her with a practical understanding of these values that no amount of instruction could have achieved. The British tourism industry embraced the story as an example of meaningful cultural exchange. Visit Britain incorporated the video into their promotional materials, not to encourage tourists to recreate the specific interaction, but to demonstrate the depth of respect and appreciation that thoughtful visitors could experience and share. Tourism officials noted an increase in visitors who seemed more interested in understanding British traditions and culture rather than simply collecting photo opportunities. Military museums around the world reported increased interest in ceremonial traditions and the history of military service. The Imperial War Museum in London created a special exhibition about ceremonial duties and their significance, featuring the Tanaka family's story as a centerpiece. Similar exhibitions appeared in military museums across multiple countries, each emphasizing how respect for service transcended national boundaries. The Japanese Embassy in London established an annual award recognizing outstanding examples of cross-cultural understanding and respect. The Tanaka Family Award for Cross-Cultural Respect was presented each year to individuals or groups who demonstrated exceptional appreciation for different cultural traditions and values. The award ceremony became a significant diplomatic event, attended by representatives from multiple countries and organizations. International relations scholars began studying the incident as an example of soft diplomacy, how individual actions by private citizens could improve understanding and relationships between nations more effectively than formal government initiatives. Several academic conferences featured panels discussing the broader implications of the Tanaka family's gesture for international relations and cultural exchange. Emma Thompson, who had recorded and shared the original video, found herself reflecting on the responsibility that came with social media influence. She became an advocate for thoughtful, respectful use of digital platforms, arguing that the power to share stories globally came with the obligation to share content that uplifted and united rather than divided. Her experience with the viral video led her to become more selective and intentional about what she chose to share online. The guards at Buckingham Palace reported a lasting change in how tourists approached and interacted with them. While most visitors had always been generally respectful, there was a noticeable increase in the thoughtfulness and consideration shown by people from many different countries. Guides began sharing the story of the Japanese family's tribute, helping visitors understand the significance of the ceremonial duties and the respect they deserved. As the first anniversary of the incident approached, plans began for a commemoration event. The British-Japanese Society proposed a ceremony that would bring together representatives from both countries to celebrate the values of respect, service, and cross-cultural understanding that the Tanaka family's gesture had exemplified. The event was planned not as a recreation of the original moment, but as a formal recognition of its lasting impact on international understanding. Hiroshi Tanaka, now 74 and still walking with his wooden cane but with undiminished dignity, was invited to return to London for the anniversary commemoration. In interviews, he remained characteristically humble about the global attention his simple gesture had generated. He consistently emphasized that he had merely done what anyone should do when encountering someone dedicated to service: show respect and recognition for their commitment. The legacy of those 20 minutes at Buckingham Palace continued to grow and evolve. What had started as one elderly Japanese man removing his hat in respect for a young British soldier had become a global symbol of how simple acts of human dignity could transcend cultural differences and create moments of genuine understanding. The story served as a powerful reminder that in a world often focused on division and conflict, the capacity for respect, appreciation, and cross-cultural connection remained strong in human hearts everywhere. The Tanaka family's gesture had proven that sometimes the most profound diplomatic achievements came not from formal negotiations or official ceremonies, but from individual humans choosing to recognize and honor the best qualities in one another. Their story would continue to inspire people around the world to approach their interactions with others, whether from their own culture or different ones, with greater respect, understanding, and appreciation for the common humanity that binds everyone together. In the end, the 20-minute tribute to Guardsman Mitchell had become something much larger than anyone could have anticipated, a lasting testament to the power of respect, the importance of tradition, and the beautiful possibility of understanding that exists when people choose to see and honor the best in one another, regardless of the cultural or national boundaries that might seem to separate them.